Welcome back to my channel. Today we will learn about one of the most devastating and heartbreaking storylines in the history of the Bold and the Beautiful. The tragic plane crash that claimed the lives of everyone aboard Flight Electra from San Francisco to Los Angeles. This is a moment that shook the entire soap opera world and left viewers emotionally devastated. The repercussions of this disaster would reverberate through the show for months to come, affecting multiple families and changing the lives of our beloved characters forever. The story begins with what appeared to be just another business trip from San Francisco back to Los Angeles. The journey seemed ordinary enough, the kind of travel that happens regularly in the fast-paced world of fashion and business that drives the plot of The Bold and the Beautiful. Several key characters found themselves on this fateful flight, completely unaware that they were about to become part of one of daytime television's most shocking and tragic moments. Electra Airlines' flight from San Francisco was scheduled to arrive in Los Angeles without any indication of the catastrophe that awaited. The passengers boarded the aircraft, settling into their seats, making phone calls, reading magazines, and engaging in typical pre-flight activities. No one could have predicted that this would be their final journey. This is what makes the tragedy even more powerful. It demonstrates how quickly life can change, how in an instant everything can be taken away from us. The explosive moment when everything changed. Without warning, as the aircraft made its approach toward Los Angeles, the unthinkable happened. The plane experienced a catastrophic explosion. In a moment that would be etched into the memories of viewers forever, the aircraft literally exploded in mid-air. This wasn't just a gradual mechanical failure or a minor incident that could be recovered from. This was a complete and total disaster. The explosion was so severe, so absolute, that there were no survivors. Every single passenger and crew member aboard Flight Electra perished in that tragic moment. The explosion itself was sudden and devastating. One moment the plane was in the sky, traveling through the air toward its destination, and the next moment it simply ceased to exist. The impact of this moment cannot be overstated. In a soap opera that had built its legacy on romantic entanglements, family drama, and business rivalries, suddenly the show had shifted into something far darker, far more tragic. Death had arrived not as a lingering illness or as expected departure, but as a shocking, violent, and absolutely final event. The news of the explosion spread rapidly. Emergency services were alerted. The media descended upon the scene. Hospitals prepared for casualties that would never come. And in Los Angeles, the families and loved ones of those aboard the flight would soon receive notifications that would forever change their lives. The impact of losing someone suddenly, without warning, without the chance to say goodbye, is incomprehensible. Will's reaction, a heart shattered. Among those who heard the devastating news was Will, whose reaction to learning of the disaster was absolutely heartbreaking. When Will received word that the plane had exploded and that everyone aboard had perished, the weight of that realization hit him like a physical blow. The pain was overwhelming, all-consuming, and left him completely devastated. Will's grief was the kind of grief that goes beyond simple sadness. It was the grief of someone who had just lost someone incredibly important, someone who had meant everything to him. The way Will responded to this tragic news demonstrated the depth of his feelings and the severity of his loss. He wasn't just dealing with sad news. He was grappling with the sudden and violent removal of someone from his life. The explosion hadn't given him time to prepare, hadn't allowed for last words or final moments together. It had simply taken away someone he cared about deeply, leaving him in a state of shock, grief, and unbearable pain. For Will, the days following the announcement of the plane crash were incredibly difficult. He struggled with the reality of what had happened, struggling to comprehend that someone he had known, someone he had cared about, was simply gone. The permanence of death, made even more final by the nature of the disaster, was something he had to come to terms with. This wasn't a situation where someone had moved away or ended a relationship on their own terms. This was death sudden and absolute. The Forrester family's collective mourning. Beyond Will's personal grief, the entire Forrester family found themselves plunged into deep mourning. The Forrester family, who had always been portrayed as a family of strength and sophistication, faced one of their greatest challenges. The grief that descended upon the family was not the kind that could be easily managed or quickly overcome. This was a grief that would require time, support, and an understanding that some things in life change us fundamentally. Ivy in particular was deeply affected by the tragedy. As a member of the Forrester family, she had strong connections to those affected by the disaster. The loss weighed heavily on her, and she found herself struggling with the emotional aftermath of the event. Ivy's grief was compounded by her family connections and her position within the Forrester dynasty. She wasn't just mourning individuals. She was witnessing the pain of those around her. supporting her family members as they processed their own losses. The Forrester family's response to this tragedy demonstrated the strength and resilience that had always characterized them. But it also showed their vulnerability. They were a family accustomed to dealing with scandals, rivalries, and personal dramas, but this was different. This was a level of tragedy that transcended their usual interpersonal conflicts. The fashions, the business dealings, the romantic entanglements that usually dominated their lives seemed trivial in the face of such a massive loss. Family gatherings that had once been filled with business discussions and strategic planning transformed into somber occasions where members came together to support one another. Conversations that would have focused on the latest designs or business ventures instead turned to memories of those lost and expressions of sympathy for those grieving. The entire family structure was shaken by the event, and they had to reorganize themselves around this new, darker reality. The ripple effects, a tragedy that changed everything. The explosion of Flight Electra wasn't just a single tragic event. It was a catalyst that would trigger a series of consequences throughout the planet. The ripple effects of this disaster would touch nearly every character on The Bold and the Beautiful, affecting relationships, business dealings, and the fundamental structure of the show's narrative. For weeks following the tragedy, the show shifted its focus from the typical romantic and business dramas that usually drove the plot to exploring the emotional aftermath of sudden loss. Characters had to contend with grief, guilt, and the difficult process of moving forward after experiencing such a traumatic event. Some characters questioned their own mortality, others reevaluated their priorities and what they valued most in life. The disaster also created new plot opportunities and character development. Grief often brings people together or pushes them apart, and the show explored both dynamics. Characters who had been at odds found common ground in their shared mourning. Other characters became isolated, withdrawn, struggling to process their emotions alone. The plane crash became a defining moment in the show's timeline, an event that characters would reference for years to come. The tragedy also affected the business side of things. The fashion industry that had been the backdrop for so many storylines had to continue, but with a changed perspective. The Forrester family had to decide how to move forward professionally while dealing with their personal losses. Would they take time away from their work? Would they throw themselves into their careers as a distraction? These were the kinds of questions that the characters had to grapple with in the aftermath of the disaster. The media coverage and public response. Within the world of The Bold and the Beautiful, the plane crash wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a massive news event. The explosion of a commercial aircraft would have been covered extensively by local, national, and even international news outlets. Reporters would have descended upon Los Angeles searching for information about the victims, the cause of the explosion, and the impact on the city. The media coverage within the show's narrative added another layer of complexity to the tragedy. Characters had to deal not only with their personal grief, but also with the public nature of the disaster. Their loved ones' deaths were being discussed on the news, analyzed by journalists, and made public in a way that would have been incredibly difficult to experience. The investigation into the cause of the explosion would have been a major story as well. Why had the plane exploded? Was it a mechanical failure? Was it sabotage? Was it a terrorist act? These questions would have haunted not only the characters on the show, but also viewers who were invested in understanding what had happened and why such a tragedy had occurred. Individual character stories beyond the immediate impact. While the overview of the tragedy and its immediate effects is important, the real emotional weight of the storyline came from the individual character stories that unfolded in its aftermath. Each character who had been connected to someone on that flight had their own journey of grief, their own way of processing the loss and moving forward. Will's personal grief, as already mentioned, was particularly impactful. But his grief wasn't just something he experienced in isolation. It affected his relationships with others, his ability to work, his emotional state. He had to find a way to honor the memory of those he had lost while also learning to live with the permanent absence of that person from his. Other characters had their own stories as well. Some had lost business partners and professional collaborators. Others had lost close personal friends. The variety of relationships that had been severed by the explosion meant that there were many different stories of loss and grief playing out simultaneously on the show. The long-term impact on relationships. As time passed following the tragedy, the plane crash's impact on relationships became increasingly apparent. Some relationships that had been troubled found renewed strength as people prioritized what truly mattered. Couples who had been taking each other for granted suddenly realized how precious their time together was. Parents and children who had been in conflict found ways to reconcile. Conversely, some relationships deteriorated in the aftermath of the tragedy. Grief affects people differently, and sometimes when people are struggling with their own pain, they're unable to be there for others in the way they need. This could create distance and conflict, adding to the emotional complexity of the situation. The Forrester family in particular, he had to navigate the challenge of maintaining their family bonds while each member dealt with their own grief and trauma. Family dynamics that had previously revolved around business competition and romantic entanglements had to adapt to include shared mourning and The need to support one another through tragedy. Closure and moving forward. Eventually, the immediate shock of the tragedy began to fade, and characters had to find ways to move forward. This didn't mean forgetting those who had been lost. It meant integrating the loss into their lives and finding a new normal that acknowledged to the absence while still allowing for life to continue. Memorial services would have been held, offering opportunities for characters to express their grief and celebrate the lives of those lost. These services would have been emotional moments bringing together characters who were all connected through their shared loss. As time moved on, characters had to decide how they would honor the memories of those lost. Some might have dedicated their work to their memory. Others might have made significant life changes based on the perspective they gained from such a stark reminder of mortality. The tragedy, while devastating, also had the potential to be transformative, pushing characters toward growth and change.